Hey everyone, welcome back to the Homesteader's Classroom. Thanks again for joining me today. Today I wanted to bring you guys into the garden, maybe a little bit of a different one. Have a little bit of a different background, but mostly because I wanted to show you something new that I have done that I probably should have done a while back ago. I know I should have done it a while back ago, but I just got busy, and that is that I have mulched most of my pots. So mulching is one of the cardinal rules that you are kind of supposed to follow as a gardener. And I have not been doing it this winter. I did it in the summer, but I think in the winter I was a little worried that when I planted the seeds, they wouldn't have enough energy after sprouting to break past the mulch and that they might die off. And they were already having to fight harder conditions of it being colder and not getting enough sun. So then I waited for them to pop up, and then I just kind of forgot about it. And that's not good. So I wanted to bring y'all over here. I'm where the beets are, where I started, and they're doing pretty good. I'm going to show them to you, and I have already mulched, which just put wood chips on top of. So I want to show you what they look like, because I know that I told you I'd give you a progress report. They pretty much look the same, but we're going to show you anyways. Okay, so I'm over here by the beets. You can see there's some mulch, and we're going to take a look down, and you can see that these seedlings here are doing pretty well. Out of all the seedlings that I planted, 4 of the 5 made it. That one over there just didn't make it. He might not have been strong enough, but these are the ones that I transplanted. And as you can see, they are growing new leaves. They all had maybe about 3 leaves. The leaves are getting bigger. They're getting more sun. They're doing really well. And then down here, I planted some seedlings, which you can kind of see. There's one right there. And then here's some more over here. And they survived as well. Now these guys over here, I planted these both with the yellow beets. And it doesn't look like any of these survived. And the reason why is because I had a bit of a problem with some squirrels. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, some squirrels had planted or put their nuts for winter storage in my pots because, well, they were uncovered and they were soft, and I guess that's just a perfect hiding place for a nut. So they ended up digging the nuts back out, and you can see here is some nut carcass right there, where you can see they opened it up right there and just took to eating it. And because of that, they ended up digging up my seeds. So only 2 managed to survive, and they're both in this pot. I've got one growing right there. I've got one little guy growing right there. But ultimately, I had some survivors. The transplants survived. They'd had a little bit of shock. And I expected that. Whenever you transplant a seed or a seedling, it's always going to go through a little bit of period transplant shock. And it did. But you can see that they're flourishing. They've gotten bigger. So that's great. And then I do have at least 4 seeds that made it through the squirrels in the winter cold. Okay, so I brought you guys over here again because the sun's changed position and I really don't want to have to squint while I'm trying to talk to you. But anyways, back to mulching. So why is mulching important? And what is mulching? Mulching is basically that you are putting a covering over the ground that is not inhabited by the plants that you're growing. And why is this important? Well, one, if you go look around, whether it be in the woods or out in a field or a pasture or even just outside in your neighborhood, you'll notice that the ground is pretty much covered all the time, whether it be by a plant or by leaves or pine straw, what have you. The ground wants to be covered. If it's not covered by something like leaves or pine straw, then it's usually growing a plant. And where you see a spot of dirt that doesn't have plants and it doesn't have any sort of covering over it, it's usually not healthy soil. It's dry, it's compacted, and it's not livable at that point. And that's just really not something that we want in our gardens. So the earth wants to be covered. And if you don't cover it with something, then it's going to find a way to cover it by basically having plant seeds be dispersed through the wind, and then they'll land in your pots and start growing in the available free soil that's there. So you want to mulch to try and prevent as much weeding as possible. That, of course, is going to be definitely more helpful for those of you who have larger gardens, it might not be growing in pots, but weeds still find their way into my pots. Sometimes because the wind carries it in, sometimes because a squirrel sticks a nut, and then I find that a tree grows there later on in the spring. Still considered a weed at that point to me, though, because I'm not trying to nurture any trees. So yes, we want to try to get rid of weeds. So covered soil is healthy soil. You want to try to protect it from the elements as much as possible. If it is open and let's say that rain is able to get on it and pound it, the more rain that you have pounding on that soil, the harder it becomes compacted. Also, if there's nothing covering it after it rains, the water is able to evaporate from it and dry it out faster. So without having a covering, you don't have any water retention in that soil, and you're also going to end up with a more compacted soil as time goes on. Mulching keeps your plants warmer, especially during the winter months, which I don't know why I didn't do it. Again, I just got too far ahead of myself. But it's going to keep those plants warmer so that if a colder night does come along, yes, your plant might be able to handle that cold temperature and it'll be fine, but it's also not going to be the best it can be. If it wasn't slightly warmer, it might go through a little bit of cold shock where it takes a little bit longer to grow. And that's what I found with a lot of my plants. They didn't quite have the necessary amounts of sun, heat retention, and fertilizer, and they were really slow growers until I added those things to them. So it helps with the health of our soil. And then a covered soil is also going to encourage living things to move in, whether those be worms or little bugs, microorganisms, things that help keep your soil alive. You want your soil to be fluffy. You want it to be well draining, and especially when it comes to pots. Like pots, which are everything that I'm growing in, I have some sort of pot, because that's all I have. I don't have any land. With pots, they already have the ability of drying out faster because they're not in a large surface area. That they're very small, so they can dry out really quickly already. And if they're available to the elements, then that's a very small amount of surface. So very quickly, the soil in my pots can be pounded, not down into something that's not as fluffy, not as livable, and then it can be dried out. So not only does this help with warmth in winters, which again, when you're dealing with pots, they get colder faster, just like they get hot faster. You really have to balance that out. It provides moisture retention in the summer, and it provides warmth and moisture retention in the winter. So these are all very good benefits to have in your garden. So now that we know why mulch is so important and how it's going to keep your garden healthier and be more vivacious, let's talk about the different types of mulch. So one, I always just considered things like wood chips. Like I have a bag right here. Whenever I would see this at the store, I'd always say, oh, well, that's a bag of mulch. True, it's a form of mulch, but all the word mulch really means is some sort of covering for the ground. It doesn't necessarily mean wood chips. I don't know why, but I always thought it did. Wood chips is a form of mulch, but there are many, and they come in two different varieties, organic and inorganic, which organic just means that it was living or used to be living. Inorganic is that it wasn't. So as far as our organic mulches go, we have wood chips, which is what I use in my garden, and you can either get big chunky varieties or the shredded varieties. I just honestly go to the Home Depot and buy a $3 bag, and that's enough to cover my garden. But for other people, that might be too expensive. But if you do want to use wood chips, then you have a large amount of space that you need to cover. You can get in touch with tree services that, cut them down and say that you want a deposit of wood chips, and you don't get to decide when, and you don't get to decide how much. But they will just come and dump a giant pile of wood chips on your yard because they need to get rid of it. You'd have to do a little bit more research, but these services do exist. So if you are looking to use a lot of wood chips, whether it be because you want to use it as mulch, or maybe you just want to try doing a giant compost pile of wood chips, then go for it. Try using one of those services. So the good thing about wood chips is that they do last pretty long because it takes them a while to break down. So you can pretty much, like, I've had some wood chips on my garden plots that have been there for at least 2 seasons. I put them in 2 falls ago, and it still has some wood chips that haven't quite broken down yet. So they take a little less time to break down. And then when they do break down, they do end up adding more nitrogen and more nutrients to your soil. So that's good. But when they are in the process of it, before they break down, they will actually steal a little bit of nitrogen from your soil. So that's something to keep in mind, that maybe you should add a little extra fertilizer when you're using wood chips. So next one that we're going to talk about is pine straw. I know a lot of people don't consider pine straw to be a really good mulch, but at the same time, like, if you go in the woods, you see pine straw all over the place. And the reason why people say it's not a good mulch is because they say that it's too acidic and it's going to make your soil acidic. Pine straw doesn't actually make your soil acidic. Yes, it is acidic, and you do have to worry about it when it comes to young plants, because if the pine straw touches those plants, then it can potentially have some hazardous outcomes. But ultimately, it's not going to make your soil more acidic, and it can still work as a good covering. Just make sure you leave some room around the base of your plants while they're growing so that the pine straw doesn't touch too much. And honestly, without meaning to, I've used pine straw all winter for this giant bed back here, because I live in a very wooded area, and the pine straw falls on my roof, and then it's been falling on my bed. As you can see, those plants back there are doing just fine. And actually, since I didn't end up mulching them myself, the pine straw has helped immensely with keeping my soil fresh and, well taken care of, since I didn't do it, and it's worked great. Like, we'll walk over there, I'll show you what it looks like. Like, none of my plants are burned or anything like that. It really hasn't been harmful or detrimental. Pine straw can definitely be used. Okay, another one you can easily find from the woods is leaf mulch. Leaves can work really well. That's another something that you just walk around and you see is all over the place. It works great for trees. Why not for the garden? The only thing you need to be a little bit concerned about is you want it to be slightly broken down, because if it's too fresh of leaves, they have the ability to kind of stack on top of each other and have the water pool on top to where it doesn't get in the soil. So you want it to be slightly decomposed leaf, but that also works great for mulch, and it will add nutrients to your soil when it breaks down. The next one we're going to talk about, or two, are straw and hay. Now, those are not the same sort of thing. Hay is going to be it's a grain, and it has seeds living in it, basically. So most people know it as you feed it to animals, but you can use it as not a compost. You can use hay as a mulch, but you do have to be aware that there is a possibility that it's going to also have some grass seeds in it still, and that might cause weeds in your garden later on. So it'd probably be better to combine hay with something else. We'll talk about that later. Another inorganic mulch instead. Straw is a byproduct of what's left over when cereal gets made. It's not going to add as much nutrition back to your soil when it breaks down, but it still works great as an insulator. It lets water go through, and it keeps your plants warm and keeps the water from being able to evaporate. So it still works great. Hey guys, I'm sure you can tell it's another day. I've had a bit of an outfit change, but I had some issue with the video for the inorganic mulch, so I wanted to redo that so y'all can have it. So the first inorganic mulch that we're going to talk about is plastic row covers. Now, this is something that's used a bit more on a commercial farm basis, but it's important to know about all the options out there to figure out what's best for your gardening situation. So basically what you do is you have the soil up in long row mounds, and you cover the plastic over on top of it. And it's supposed to work to where you poke a hole in it, and then you can plant your seed directly in it, and it's supposed to keep the weeds from growing up underneath it, and also keeps it insulated, and just the plant should be able to grow from that hole. Which is good, but they do come in a different variety. You can have a black, white, or clear. Now the black one is way better at preventing weeds from popping up underneath it, and it does keep it warmer because that black color retains the sun's heat for a longer period of time. But it's not water permeable. So if you decide to use it, you do need to have a water system set up underneath it to where your plants can still get water. The white one is water permeable, but it won't retain as much heat. And, there's a possibility that some weeds may come up with it out from underneath it because of the color. It should work pretty well. And then the clear one, now this one is definitely not going to prevent your weeds from growing, because the sunlight can pass through it and still the seeds that are in the soil that aren't your plant seeds are going to grow. But this is one of those that would be good to combine with another type of mulch. So if you were to use a clear plastic covering to maybe put some straw on top of it, and so, or wood chips or what have you. If that's the way you want to go, you can combine those two mulches to have a better outcome. So, now, although they do help prevent weeds really well, we have to keep in mind some of their downsides. It is made of plastic, and that means that it's going to take a really long time to deteriorate. It's not going to provide any more nutrients to your soil as it breaks down, and it's going to take a very, very long time. It's not going to break down in your lifetime, at least. And so it can get rips in it as well. And once it gets rips in it from what have you, whether it be animals or the weather, you're going to have to replace it. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so the second inorganic mulch would be rocks. Now, rocks are not something that are usually used in vegetable gardening. They're more so used for landscaping, but they do have some properties that could be applicable for your situation. So the first thing that rocks are really good at is that they are great for preventing soil erosion. The best example I can give of that is if you have like a gutter spout and it's just carving a rift through your soil, put rocks there, and that disperses the water enough to where it's preventing that soil erosion from happening. Could be useful for other areas. If I know that it's used in construction for drainage. It could help in drainage in your garden as well. Second thing that rocks are really good for is that they retain heat. I know, especially for like desert climates, it gets so cold at night. If you're trying to grow something but you want to be able to keep your plant from getting too cold at night, maybe consider rocks. They're going to retain that sun's heat, and it's going to take a lot longer to lose it, so it can help keep those plants warm. Now, this can also be a backlash, though, because if you have sensitive plants that can't take that strong of a rebound of heat, it can potentially burn those plants. So just take a look at what plants it is that you're trying to keep, and maybe test it out, but try to do your research and figure out whether they can take having that heat come into contact with. Probably not good for short plants, something that's maybe a little bit taller, but it'll help keep the root system at least warm versus the trunk and the leaves, whatever your plant, or the stem and the leaves. So yeah, all of these solutions that I've talked about, get creative with it. Try to figure out what's best for your situation, and then even if you don't know, don't be afraid to try something out and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, you can always switch to a different type of mulch. So now that I've talked about the different varieties of mulch, I know I talked about how it helps. I'm going to give you a more hands-on and show you how mulching helps. So we're going to go take a look at the old videos. Okay, so first off, here's my bed I was telling you about, and although it's not a lot, you can see how there's all that pine straw back there. I mean, it's not a huge covering, but there are surprisingly few weeds. There's some. Obviously, it's not a good covering, but there's definitely weed growth, and there's more squirrel activity. And I do still have, you can see there's old wood chips in here too that haven't quite broken down. That all is going to help. And yes, there's some weeds in my bed, but not as much as having an area that has had no mulching, which is like this Brussels sprout over here. I did not really mulch this at all, and you can see how these weeds are popping up. Now this one was mulched. I added more to it, but it was mulched previously. It had no weeds whatsoever. This one has all the weeds. And that's something I'm going to need to pick up and put mulch on top of. But so there you go. No mulch. You've got weeds. Another thing I want to show y'all is I was talking about that water retention. So I've got my hose right here, and I want to show you. I'm going to water right here, and you can see the water is not pooling up. It's good to go. It's going immediately through. The mulch helps it. This pot has no mulch. You see how that water's collecting on top already? It's already beginning to pool. I gave these pots the same amount of water, but this soil is so compacted from having had no mulch and having the elements work on it that it took a lot longer for that water to go away. And especially when it really dries out, the water will just sit on top of your soil. And that's really no good for your plants. Especially if your soil's too dry and you water it. Look at that. The water is already coming out of the bottom of the pot. There's no water coming out of the bottom of this pot because that soil's moist and it's holding on to its water. This soil is too dry and compacted that all the water I just gave it, it pooled on top and then it kind of flowed away at the sides. And it just leaks through the bottom of the pot a lot faster. And this plant, these plants are not really watered efficiently right now. They're going to dry out a lot more easier. Okay, now that we've seen firsthand how mulching can be beneficial to your plants, and now you might know exactly what kind of mulch you want to use. Now the question is how much of that mulch to use in your garden. So generally you're going to want to use 2 to 3 inches of whatever mulch it is that you decide to use and have that put over the plant. Because again, your goal is to prevent weeds. It's to prevent evaporation. It's to maintain soil structure. It's to protect your plants. It's to keep them cool. It's to keep them warm. You're going to need a bit of mulch to do this. And especially if you're working with a really weedy area, you might want to even go a little bit more than that and do more 3 to 4 inches because you're really just trying to kill the weeds out of that area and prevent them from growing. Think about what your garden needs and choose the best decision for it. But you do want that thick layer, otherwise the benefits of your mulch is not going to really be fruitful. As you saw in my pine box, yes, there was some pine straw, a very, very light covering of pine straw, and because it was so light, we saw that there were still weeds that were growing in it. Not as much, but still some weeds. I don't want any weeds, so I'm going to need to add more mulch to that box. So hopefully I have demystified mulch as much as I can, and I understand it a bit more. I hope y'all understand it a bit more, and I hope you really take this tool and use it in your gardens. It's going to help with the longevity and prosperity of your garden. So thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you guys for the next lesson. Bye.